views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
We're all familiar with the three whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most. The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burish is here to help.
Fostering deeper relationships, influencing behavior change, developing resilience. You're about to start winning. Here is your host, Christine Bright.
Welcome to Parenting Game. I am so glad you are here. We are doing a 3-part series on what needs to happen before you send your child off to college. There's a lot of discussions that I've noticed working with families that don't happen, and sometimes it's in the midst of when a tragedy occurs. So there is some estate planning that actually needs to happen once your child turns 18. And my guest today is Noelle Augelli from Hurley Burish Attorneys, and she's going to share with you those documents that are important to have in place. Noelle, thank you so much for coming again.
Thanks for having me.
I can't believe that it was the 17th episode that I had you as a guest, which was over a year ago.
Yeah.
And now we're filming episode 54.
Congratulations.
I know. Time goes by so quickly.
Yes.
While we were chatting before the cameras came on, you pointed to this picture behind me and that it has some family significance.
It does, yes. So when I was on the last episode, my grandma-in-law was watching, and she saw that in the background and mentioned that that building was actually where her father's law firm was in.
Oh my goodness, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love the history of Sun Prairie, and I've loved that they have really done a great job of trying to keep some of those buildings as original, as possible. Yeah. So that's a great connection. So let's go ahead and just dig into this topic. I know that I didn't realize how much changed when my son turned 18. And that now they're a legally adult, but even though I'm still looking at him as my child, the law looks at them as a legal adult. So there are some documents that need to be put in place before you send your child off to college. So can you share with us a little bit about a medical power of attorney?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, as soon as you turn 18, in the eyes of the law, they're treated the same way as their parents. Even though at 18 you might still be in high school, you might still want mom and dad's help in the best case scenario, or need it in sort of the worst case scenario. So what I think absolutely everybody should have at the age of 18 and older is healthcare power of attorney. And there's several different ways that it can be written, and that's usually a conversation I have with as soon as someone's turning 18. One way is it's effective only upon incapacity. So what that would mean is once you're declared unable to make your own decisions by multiple doctors or a judge, then your authority to make your decisions is removed and granted to someone else. So when you're 18 and you make your own decisions, you would want to have a backup if you absolutely can't, if there is an accident, a tragedy, those sorts of situations. But another thing to keep in mind is, well, in my experience, there tends to be 3 types of doctors in that incapacity determination. Type 1 is the reasonable doctor. And of course, no one ever calls a lawyer when that happens. And that happens most of the time, to be fair, that it mostly that process goes over well, and maybe their authority is removed, the appointed mom and dad, and everything goes smoothly. But then the other two, sometimes I run into some concerns. Type 2 is the doctor who is all too willing to remove your authority to make your own decisions because maybe they have a concussion, maybe they're a little slow to make decisions, or 18 and they're nervous about making their own decisions, so they're all too willing to remove the authority and just give it to someone else when legally it's a gray area, right? And we don't really want to be taking autonomy necessarily away from our 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds, but there's that situation, and sometimes I get called then. And the third type is and I'm seeing an increasing number of them, the doctor who is afraid to get sued and won't sign anything.
Okay.
So depending on the combination of doctors who are presiding over your 18-year-old, that's, if we've got 2 or 3, that tends to be when judges get involved. And well, that takes time and money when the kid needs help today.
Yeah.
So to avoid those types of scenarios, it's possible, and there's shades of gray in between the two kind of extremes, is you can have it effective immediately. And I call that the adult training wheels.
Yeah.
So they could sign off as soon as they're 18 saying that my parent has the authority to help me make decisions if I ever want or need the help. And that way mom and dad can still call the doctor for you.
And that's something that parents don't think about, and I didn't think about, is you no longer can just call, and say what's going on or what were the test results. At 18, that all stops. It all has to be now, your child has to grant that permission.
Precisely.
And all too often, right, we don't think about it, and now we're in the middle of something pretty heavy.
Exactly.
And then now you have emotions and everything else on top of it that could make it more difficult.
The last thing you want is to get a judge involved.
Yeah,
in that scenario.
absolutely. Because now you've lost all control. So I like that adult training wheel piece where the conversation has happened and we'll help you, and we still have access. So I think that's really good for parents, to know that there's these transitional phases that can happen with those permissions.
Yeah.
So the other document is financial power of attorney. And I know parents are like, well, my kid has no money. But they do, and access to, something happens, you can't, maybe close down their subscription services or whatever.
Precisely.
Just all those things you don't think about until you're in the middle of it. So explain what goes on with the financial power of attorney.
Same thing, kind of with the healthcare power of attorney. You can have it effective only upon incapacity, but you could also have it more of a training wheels type scenario, and you can really tailor it to exactly your needs. But what I've been seeing more and more is that kind of effective immediate adult training wheels. So maybe on the best case scenario, maybe your 18-year-old is studying abroad and forgot to file some scholarship forms. Mom and dad can still do that, or mom and dad can still pay the bill for you so you don't have bad credit later on if you're stuck out of the country or something like that. So the best case scenario, those things can be a little bit more interchangeable. And then the worst case scenario, like you mentioned, if you're in the hospital and you can't, mom and dad can step in and help you manage that. And you've heard me say it 1,000 times in person, and then on our last show, estate planning is not just for the rich and famous. Things that the 18-year-old might have are apartment, scholarship, their first job, digital assets, social media, which nowadays there's vehicle, precisely. You can be entered into a lot of contracts, and those can all be sort of intangible assets that someone needs to be able to manage at that point, or even pets, and that's something that I've been seeing more and more is planning for.
Yeah, I didn't even think
pets.
about that.
Yeah.
There was one scenario. I had a friend whose daughter was abroad, lost her debit card or whatever,
Yeah.
and they had thought it just wise that all the money that they were going to give her just to put in her accounts, and then she could access like debit card. And she got everything figured out, but she was several days with no money, and parents couldn't just go and say, okay, transfer some to my account, we'll wire it to you, like we'll do a workaround. Like they're going, you have to figure it all out because we can't do anything. So it's just, or traveling, go on a vacation, and now you get yourself in a little, they get themselves in a little pickle, lose something. You cannot help them at all. So it's, and you and I had that talk, and I'm like, yeah, me and my son need to get in to see you like right away on that, because I don't want it to be like now we're in the middle of something, and I wish we had done that. So with the financial power of attorney, do you have to specify, or can you, or do you have to, or once that sign, anything financial, whoever you allocate can do all of that on your behalf? Or do you have to specify? Is it only banking? How does that work?
That's entirely up to you.
Okay.
So a lot of these documents are extremely customizable, especially in Wisconsin, exactly what your needs are. I've seen some powers of attorney that says you can only do this during this period of time. And I have mine, for example, is effective right now, and for example, my husband can sign for me for anything. Mm-hmm. So it can be very, very open-ended, very, very detailed and restricted, or anywhere in between.
Okay, and then can you do temporary, like once it's in place, you can like revoke it, or can you write it that, yes, our child is going to be traveling abroad for this year, so it's going to be through these dates and these dates, all that?
All of that.
Okay.
And even if it is the open-ended and definitely this is effective and we can do all the things, you can always revoke that anytime.
Okay.
So you granting someone agency does not mean that you're removing your own necessarily, especially if it's effective immediately. That is.
This was a question I was going to save at the end, but I think I'll ask it now. Mm-hmm. So you're, a child is now an adult, 18, you're adult, so you're going in. Parents need to understand that this is their child's paperwork. This is their, all their legal documents. When they're 8, then they could come in at any time to you and like revoke it and change it because they're 18. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That once they're 18, they have the full legal right to enter into any sort of agreement or arrangement with their own health care and their own financial and estate planning matters.
Yeah, and it's their agreement, so the parents can't go in and change it without the 18-year-old knowing. It's like, I think sometimes parents think, well, I have this and I can go in and change it, and you're not the owner of that. Your child is going to be the owner of that, and they are well within their rights to go in and change it and stuff at any time.
If they want their parents to come with, of course they're welcome, but it'd be no different from, I can't go and change my parents' will without them knowing.
There seems sometimes that disconnect, right? Because it's hard. You still see them, as a child. It's hard to let that go, but we really need to make that mental shift that they are a legal adult now. By law, they may not be acting like a legal adult, but by law they are.
Yeah.
The other two, we got HIPAA authorization and simple will. So speak into those two documents.
Absolutely. So HIPAA authorization is who can know what's going on for healthcare information, who can get access to healthcare information. Of course, the healthcare power of attorney, that's your decision maker. But you might have somebody that you want to know what's going on. So one that I did recently for an 18-year-old heading off to college next year is, that mom and dad wanted to help make decisions if they ever wanted or needed the help. But down the street from the university, there's an aunt. Now, they didn't really trust the aunt making the healthcare decisions, but if something were to happen, she'd be the closest one there to meet at the doctor, get information, and call home.
Got it.
So you can say who can get access to information. It doesn't necessarily need to only be the decision maker. Some people put friends that they travel with, or their pastor, or whoever they would want.
Oh, that is really good to know, because that can be a little scary, right? Like, who
Yeah.
are you going to let and have access to the medical records? So it's good to know that there are kind of those barriers to entry, and you don't have to have everybody just know everything.
Yeah.
So
But then a
that's good.
caution is, as you've said earlier, is once you're 18, unless you sign something, no one has access to that.
Yeah. And that can be scary, especially again, car accident situation and stuff. And that's probably the one that I've heard the most, when parents all of a sudden that light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
And child's been in a car accident and they're running, and all of a sudden now there's this like,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, wait, it's my kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're an adult. So we need to, there's this different procedures to go through. So it's so important. I mean, you don't want those things to happen, but it's just good to have it in place. And then explain a little bit about simple will.
Yeah.
And why I know parents are going, they don't have any assets. Like, why do they need a will?
Well, I'm a little biased because I'm a estate planning attorney, but I think everybody should have at least something, a will or a trust or those sorts of things. Probably at 18. I'm not seeing a strong reason for most to go the trust route, but I think a will is absolutely a reasonable document that everyone should have. The things that they might have are, of course, their bank accounts, their job, their car, those sorts of things, their pets. So Wisconsin has a default will for everybody. And how it works is essentially we go through in short, the probate process to determine what you have, what you owe, who you're related to, and then you go through a court process to settle that out. And on average, it takes 8 months to a year in Wisconsin for the average situation. Granted, if there's not a lot of assets, there's not kids yet at this point, or at least we hope for most for 18-year-olds, it might not be terribly complicated, but still it might not be necessarily the direction that they want things to go. Maybe it would make more sense that it went to the sibling, to the parent, or etc. And like I said, for the car, there's a hard and fast number of what makes probate happen. And that hard and fast number is $50,000. Now, the kid might not have $50,000, but if they've got a car and you're adding up all of the other assets they might have and what little they have in the bank account, then we're going through that process. Where a will redirects that process and simplifies that process, and coordinating that with beneficiary designations and other avoidance tools, we can really make that process as quickly and easy as possible.
And it's not a big expense,
It's
to do it. When you're talking about assets, because I even think about my son now, I'm just like, what does he have? Would it be, even like 50,000? Because you think of that big stuff, like how much cash does he have in the bank, and does he have a car or own a home? And he doesn't. He has a car. I don't know how much cash he has in the bank, but he's a musician, and I was going, I wonder how much all his guitars and amps and computer gear.
Yeah.
I'm going, oh, he may well be, at that number.
Yeah.
And then it kicks you in, now into this year-long process instead of, an easier process.
Yeah.
And there are some things too, which I think about him. I mean, the conversation doesn't have to be, heavy.
No, yeah.
But, it's like, dude, like, if something would happen, I'm confident he would have some specific friends that he would want to have some of his guitars and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's, as I said, we often come into it with this like a lot of yuck, and I think we can just make it a little bit more lighthearted.
Exactly.
And practical piece on that. We had a discussion too about with this 18-year-old too, you can get access to like medical and financial. And another thing parents don't think about is you can't have access to their school records. So I know that's not part of estate planning, but what parents do need to do is talk with the administration too, and there's paperwork that can be put in place so they can get grades and stuff, especially if they're doing scholarship, helping them with
Yeah.
scholarships and things like that. So that's another piece that needs to happen. So, we have this 18-year-old number,
Yeah.
and these are these documents that need to be put in place. As, your child grows and gets older, what are the other significant life changes that happen where you should make another visit back and
Yeah.
start thinking about revamping or putting other things into place?
Absolutely. So, major life events would be if they're getting married. That's a huge one we should talk about before the wedding and then after the wedding, on whether we want to have a prenuptial agreement or not, and how do we want that to look like. And then once they're married, now they own things together, which can complicate things further, to say the least.
Yes.
So the marriage, moving, acquiring large assets, the first house, those sorts of things, because then you've got a much larger asset that can get caught up into that probate process. But 5 years, I think, is a decent rule of thumb, if not, because the laws change every couple of years, and your life changes every couple of years. So I don't think it's a bad idea to at least once every 5 years touch base with your estate planning attorney and walk through options. I tend to have a rotation where I reach out to my clients once a year or once every other year, depending on what their preferences are, to say, hey, do you want to just sit down and have a chat? Does the plan still make sense?
Yeah. And then, too, is there complications? So they're in here state, and we talked a lot about, going abroad for maybe short times, or where, their stuff is all going to kind of stay here, but they may be transferring to a school out of state for a year. Does that make complications? Is it, because they've moved and they're in a different state? So how does that work?
That's a really good question, and estate planning laws are very state specific.
Yes.
So that while we can write it in Wisconsin that absolutely this is your power of attorney and it can come with you, depending on where you are, the hospital might be used to seeing things a little bit different, or maybe there's more available in the state that you're moving to or less available. So I think it's a really good idea that if they are moving out of state, that we at least consult an attorney in that state to make sure that everything lines up well.
And that's something that you can help a client with.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah.
It isn't like they got to go find now another estate attorney. They could still work with you, and you help navigate those waters.
Yeah, that most attorneys should be able to help you find somebody.
Yeah. So, I know there's just so much more, and we do have just a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Is there another just really tip? I want parents to know this before we wrap this up.
Absolutely. So, of course, know that at 18, even though it's your little baby, the law doesn't see it that way. Now, that's not to say that you can't still parent them and still have that active role. We just need to be conscious of it and aware and intentional about those decisions, from everything to the powers of attorney for healthcare and financial, to who can get access to information, may it be medical, financial, or academic. Other things that I think are a good idea is let your kids know what their plan or your plan for your kids looks like, because they might have provisions saying that if something happens to mom and dad, it goes to the kids, but maybe not the kid's spouse, and they need to have a prenup to keep those assets separate, or those sorts of provisions. That I think it's a cumulative discussion from one generation to the next, and once you turn 18, they should start at what steps you're comfortable with, bringing them into that holistic conversation.
Yeah. And just, make it a pizza night or something.
Oh, yeah.
bring some fun into it.
Absolutely. You got to do something more fun after talking about estate planning.
It's, it's hard stuff, but, as you and I know, me working with families and in the business that you're in, it's this heartbreaking when you see that a tragedy has happened, and now they have to navigate all this in a more difficult manner.
Yeah.
So it's worth just to take the time and have those conversations. Noelle, thank you so much for being my guest again.
Thank you
I
so much.
appreciate it. And I thank you for tuning in to the Parenting Game.
We're all familiar with the 3 whats: what it is, what it can do for me, and what does it cost. Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, can help you find the answers with insurance coverage to help protect what's most important to you, all at a price you can afford. So while you're juggling work and kids while trying to keep an eye on your financial future, Tyler Rickenaugh, Country Financial, will make sure they are the first ones there when you need them most.
The kids are back to school, and your schedule is busier than ever. From daycare pickup, doctor's appointments, sports, and college tuition, a parent's signature is a powerful thing. Have you ever stopped to think, what would happen if you weren't able to provide one? With thoughtful estate planning, you can make sure that your child's health and education needs are met in the event of your absence due to a temporary incapacity or even death. The estate planning team at Hurley Burish is here to help.
Thank you for watching The Parenting Game. All episodes of The Parenting Game are available on demand at sunprairiemediacenter.com.